Smoke curls through the shattered air, acrid and choking, as distant shells tear the horizon into fire and ruin. Amid the chaos, a lone mechanic huddles beneath the scorched hull of a war machine, hands slick with oil and the faint warmth of blood. He breathes through the roar, whispering to the cold metal, "If this engine dies, we all die." In that instant, fragility and steel collide, and survival becomes a prayer whispered against impossible odds. The mechanic's hands trembled, not from fear, but from the relentless weight of responsibility pressing upon every joint and sinew. Each bolt tightened, each valve adjusted, carried the weight of countless lives. A misstep could mean death, not just for him, but for the squadron relying on the roaring engines above. Around him, the battlefield raged with unyielding fury, metal shrieking under bombardment, the ground quaking as artillery shells birthed craters of smoke and flame. Yet in this inferno, he worked with meticulous precision, a solitary sentinel in a cathedral of destruction. The contrast was cruel, his human frame, fragile and fleeting, encased by grime-streaked coveralls, reached into the heart of machines built to endure eternity. Pistons hissed, engines groaned, and hydraulic limbs quivered like tired beasts, yet they obeyed his touch, responding with mechanical devotion to the rhythm of his hands. Every spark that leapt from his tools was a small triumph, a heartbeat against the chaos. Yet each one reminded him that the line between life and obliteration was thin as a hair. Rumors whispered among the soldiers haunted him even here. They spoke of cursed engines that refused repair, of tanks whose crews had vanished without a trace, of machinery that seemed almost alive in its malevolence. He did not know what was myth, what was truth, but the uncertainty gnawed at him, a subtle dread that threaded through the roar of artillery. Still, he persisted, driven by a duty older than himself, older than the world itself. In these moments, he reflected on the strange poetry of his existence. A man, ephemeral and fragile, entrusted with the lifeblood of steel and fire. He was a mediator between destruction and survival, a quiet fulcrum upon which the fortunes of many rested. Every drop of sweat, every smear of oil, every calculated breath was a testament to the stubborn insistence of life against the machinery of death. And though the horizon burned and the screams of war assaulted the senses, he moved forward, hands steady, heart measured, bound by an unspoken covenant. To keep the engines alive, even if it cost him everything. The mechanic's duty was absolute, yet the cost, intangible and suffocating, pressed upon him like the weight of the entire Imperium. For a fleeting heartbeat, the roar of artillery and the grind of engines faded, replaced by a fragile, almost forgotten world. He saw it in the small details. The warm glow of a forge on a quiet evening, the scent of oil mixed with the sweetness of bread, laughter echoing through a workshop where no one feared death. Those memories, once mundane, now gleamed like relics of a lost life, fragile against the relentless tide of war. He remembered the faces of those he had loved, the simple cadence of conversation, the shared pride in creation rather than destruction. Fingers that now traced the cold metal of tanks had once traced the delicate edges of tools and scrolls, shaping life instead of preserving war. The contrast was unbearable. The weight of memory pressed upon his chest, a ghostly reminder of warmth and comfort in a universe that had forgotten both. Even as shells erupted in the distance, a small, irrational hope flared within him. The memory of evenings spent beneath a soft glow, the scent of oil and flame mingling harmlessly with laughter. He recalled dreams of wandering distant worlds, of seeing places untouched by the stink of promethium and blood, of feeling the wind on his face without fear of annihilation. Each recollection was a knife, cutting both pain and longing into the same fragile pulse. Yet those memories were not merely solace, they were warnings. They reminded him of what had been lost, of the humanity slipping through his fingers as surely as sand through an hourglass. Every repair, every clank of metal, every flash of flame from a welding torch was a stark reminder of what survival demanded. He had become a man balanced between two existences. One lived in warmth and laughter, now distant. The other forged in fire, blood, and the eternal hum of engines. He wondered, in quiet moments between explosions, if the life he remembered had been real or merely a fragment. A shadow that whispered of humanity he could never fully reclaim. The world of memory felt like a dream caught behind a cracked lens, beautiful and untouchable, while the present pressed on with relentless certainty. He tightened a bolt with trembling hands, the ghost of a smile lingering on lips that had long since learned the cost of hope, yet still clinging to it in the small sanctuaries of recollection. The world erupted around him. Artillery shells tore the horizon into fire and smoke, their concussive waves rattling both bone and metal. The air was thick with acrid flame, the smell of burning promethium and scorched flesh clinging to his lungs. Sparks danced across the blackened hull of the tank, reflecting in his oil-stained eyes as he crouched beneath its trembling belly. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet he could not. The engines of war were failing, and with them, the lives of those depending on them. Hands steady despite the chaos, he plunged into the mechanical heart of the beast. Piston rods quivered like wounded limbs. Hydraulic lines hissed in pain, and valves threatened to seize under the inferno's heat. Each tool he wielded became an extension of himself, precise and deliberate, a conduit of control in a world that sought to shred him. Sparks leapt from welding torches, flaring briefly like dying stars, illuminating the twisted, soot-streaked landscape around him. In that light, the horror of war revealed itself, not in grand gestures or heroics, but in the intimate terror of survival. He could hear the distant cries of soldiers, their voices fragmented by smoke and distance, a chorus of desperation that threaded through the clamor of steel and fire. One misstep, one false judgment, and the tank would fail, leaving a company of men exposed to annihilation. Yet within this crucible there was a strange clarity. The engine did not demand courage, nor morality, nor hope. It demanded precision, patience, and relentless attention. And he delivered breath by breath, bolt by bolt, heart hammering in sync with the pulsing machinery. As he worked, fleeting thoughts rose to the surface. The absurdity of human fragility in the shadow of war's relentless machinery. The paradox of living in service to engines designed for destruction. He imagined the tank as a living entity, its metal sinews straining, its mechanical lungs wheezing under the heat, yet dependent entirely upon his hands. And in that moment, he recognized a perverse intimacy, man and machine, life and metal, bound together in the fleeting possibility of survival. Flames licked closer, painting his skin with heat and soot, yet he pressed on, guided by instinct and duty. The hiss of valves, the groan of pistons, and the rhythm of tools on steel became a language he alone could understand, a dialogue of survival whispered in sparks and smoke. When the engine finally roared to life, it was not merely a machine that had awakened. It was a testament to human perseverance, fragile and fleeting against a universe that cared nothing for either man or machine. In that inferno, he glimpsed the essence of war, not glory, not honor, but the quiet, terrible weight of responsibility, the intimate dance between life and annihilation. And as the tank rumbled to action, the mechanic exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, aware that every heartbeat hereafter would be measured against the tremor of engines, the roar of gunfire, and the unyielding crucible of survival. The battlefield was a cemetery in motion. Flashes of molten fire lit the silhouettes of men torn apart, their screams swallowed by the roar of artillery and the groan of dying engines. He saw their faces in fragmented moments. Friends, brothers in arms, each one a story cut brutally short by the indiscriminate hand of war. His heart ached with every loss, yet the rhythm of duty demanded he continue. To pause, to grieve, was a luxury he could not afford. Memories of those he had failed surged unbidden, bitter and relentless. Faces he could not save, names whispered in vain, echoes that haunted every corner of his mind. Each death carved a hollow into his chest, a reminder that survival in this world was not merely skill, but chance, a cruel lottery where effort often counted for nothing. And yet he pressed on, hands stained with both oil and the faint, unshakable warmth of blood that belonged to those now gone. He contrasted their human fragility against the merciless logic of the machines he served. While the engines obeyed, enduring fire and collapse without complaint, men fell with a single misstep or a stray fragment of shrapnel. The disparity was brutal, a stark meditation on the ephemeral nature of life. In this crucible, he felt the weight of every heartbeat, every breath, every decision that might mean the difference between life and death. Yet even amidst the grief, there were fragments of beauty, tiny sparks of courage, brief moments when soldiers acted not for orders or duty, but for each other. A comrade throwing himself across a wounded friend, another sacrificing cover to rescue a stranded unit. Those moments flickered in his mind, fragile against the overwhelming darkness, reminding him of the humanity that clung stubbornly to a world determined to snuff it out. Amid the chaos, he caught glimpses of one particularly close companion, now gone, and a knot of suspicion formed in his chest. Whispers of sabotage, of unseen enemies manipulating the battlefield, gnawed at the edges of his thoughts. The mystery deepened the pain and yet also sharpened his resolve. He could not afford hesitation. For every friend lost, for every life snatched by chance or treachery, he bore the responsibility to keep the engines alive. In the end, the battlefield demanded both memory and motion, grief and action. He clenched a wrench, tightened a bolt, and whispered a quiet vow. Their deaths would not be in vain, and the fragile flame of human perseverance, however fleeting, would endure even in the shadow of endless war. The horizon burned with unrelenting fire, casting long shadows over the cratered earth. The mechanic stood, grime and sweat streaking his face, heart hammering as he surveyed the battlefield. Before him lay the last operational tank of the unit, a monstrous sentinel of steel, battered and smoking, its engines groaning like a wounded beast. Around it, the corpses of comrades in twisted wreckage whispered of inevitability, a grim testament to lives sacrificed. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet duty anchored him in place. He knew what was required. If the tank fell silent, the enemy would sweep through the line, leaving nothing but death in their wake. Yet to repair it meant risking himself, stepping into the heart of fire where shells fell like hail and shrapnel tore through flesh and metal alike. The choice was brutal: survival at the cost of countless others, or self-sacrifice for the chance, however fleeting, to hold the line. His chest tightened with the weight of inevitability, a suffocating knowledge that no decision was free of consequence. Hands shaking but precise, he moved toward the engine, fingers tracing the familiar yet foreign contours of pistons, conduits, and valves. Sparks erupted, showering him in a brief, blinding light, and for a moment, the world seemed to pause. Each bolt tightened was a heartbeat borrowed from the universe itself, each adjustment a plea against the encroaching chaos. He felt the paradox of life and machine in his veins, the fragile pulse of a human beating in rhythm with the relentless logic of steel. thoughts of those lost flickered through his mind. Comrades, friends, faces that would haunt him long after this war ended. Their absence pressed upon him, urging him forward even as fear gnawed at his resolve. The battlefield seemed almost alive, its thunderous roar a test of will and a reminder that survival was not guaranteed. Sweat and blood mixed on his skin, each drop a measure of his mortality, each spark a fragile testament to perseverance. Minutes stretched into eternity as the engine responded reluctantly to his touch. Wheezing and coughing like a beast clawing its way back to life, he felt the weight of the universe pressing against him. The fragile line between triumph and oblivion, the unbearable responsibility of a single soul in a maelstrom of fire and death. And then, with a final twist, the engine roared, a sound of salvation and damnation entwined. The tank shuddered, alive again, ready to face the inferno. He staggered back, exhaustion and relief flooding him, knowing he had chosen correctly, yet painfully aware that this moment of victory was merely another step along a path of endless sacrifice. In that instant, he understood the cruel essence of duty. It demanded everything and yet offered nothing but the fleeting affirmation that for now, life endured. Coiled lazily into the twilight, carrying with it the acrid stench of promethium and burnt flesh. The mechanic leaned against the hull of the revived tank, muscles trembling, vision blurred by sweat, soot, and the relentless weight of exhaustion. Around him, the carnage stretched like a living nightmare, a tapestry of death and fire, and yet the engines he had coaxed back to life thrummed with stubborn vitality. They were alive, and for a fleeting heartbeat, so was he. Pain radiated from every joint, every limb, yet he remained conscious of a strange, introspective clarity. In the stillness between explosions, he glimpsed the paradox of his existence. A man, fragile and fleeting, capable of only so much, standing as guardian over machines built for eternity. Life and metal intertwined in a delicate, terrible dance. Each heartbeat seemed louder in the oppressive quiet, each breath a measure of his lingering humanity. He wondered, fleetingly, whether survival meant anything if the world around him remained a crucible of endless death. The loss of comrades pressed upon him, spectral and unyielding. Their absence was a weight as tangible as any shell impact, a reminder that even in victory the cost of survival was unbearable. Yet amidst this grief, a revelation emerged. The universe did not measure courage, nor value heroism, nor grant comfort. It demanded endurance. To exist, to act, to keep the engines alive, was both defiance and submission, a truth he had known in fragments, now unavoidable in its entirety. He traced the edges of the tank's hull, fingers brushing soot and warped metal, as if seeking answers in the cold, unyielding surface. The machine's roar, now steady and commanding, was both triumph and indictment. It would continue to march forward, indifferent to life, death, or memory. And yet, within that indifference, he recognized a subtle beauty, a testament to human perseverance against impossible odds, the faint echo of hope stitched into the cold rhythm of survival. As darkness gathered and the last embers of daylight faded, he allowed himself a quiet exhale, a surrender not to despair but to understanding. He had acted. He had survived. Yet he knew this was neither an end nor a reprieve. Life, like the engines beneath him, continued in motion, indifferent, eternal, and indifferent. And in that stark, solemn truth, he felt the fragile, fading pulse of humanity linger, stubborn and ephemeral, against the crushing weight of endless war. Night settled over the battlefield like a heavy shroud, folding the ruins of fire and metal into a cloak of shadow. The roar of distant artillery had faded into a haunting rhythm, the world holding its breath between each echo of destruction. The mechanic sat atop the hull of the revived tank, hands resting on cold metal, eyes tracing the shattered horizon. Above him, smoke and ash mingled with the dying light, painting a sky both beautiful and terrible, a reminder that even in ruin, the universe carried a somber poetry. He reflected on the days, the weeks, the endless cycle of survival and loss. Each engine he had coaxed to life was more than a machine. It was a fragile lifeline for soldiers who would never again hear the laughter of home. Every bolt tightened, every valve adjusted, had been a prayer whispered into the indifferent void. He pondered the paradox of his existence. A single human, fleeting and fragile, entrusted with the endurance of metal, entrusted with the lives of others, entrusted with the cruel calculus of survival. Memories, both tender and painful, rose unbidden. He saw faces long gone, comrades whose voices had become whispers on the wind. He recalled the warmth of simpler times, the faint, almost mythical glow of a life untouched by war. And yet those memories were not soft comforts. They were reminders of what humanity cost. Each act of survival, each successful repair, demanded a toll. The erosion of innocence, the fading of joy, the quiet surrender to the grim machinery of duty. The tank beneath him rumbled softly, alive, breathing through its pistons and hydraulics, as if aware of his thoughts. He allowed himself a moment of wonder, a recognition of beauty in the convergence of man and machine, life and logic. Here, amidst the destruction, the mechanic understood the strange intimacy of his labor. Survival was not merely a matter of courage, but a delicate negotiation between flesh, steel, and the unforgiving laws of war. He rose, standing amidst the shadows, and considered the world that stretched before him. Endless conflict, death, and fire, the Imperium marched forward, indifferent to individual suffering, yet sustained by the quiet devotion of those who, like him, bore the weight of survival in silence. In that solemn truth, he felt both insignificance and profound connection. The universe offered no applause, no recognition, yet in the rhythm of engines, in the fragile persistence of life against annihilation, there was a story worth living, worth remembering, if only for a heartbeat. As night deepened and stars blinked coldly above, he allowed himself a whisper, not to the living, but to the memory of all who had fallen, to the engines that endured, and to the fragile spark of humanity still flickering within him. We endure. We rise. We remain even when the world seeks to erase us. And with that, he turned back to his work, carrying the weight of life, memory, and purpose into the unrelenting darkness of tomorrow. Video description: in the grim darkness of the 41st millennium, even the smallest role can be a matter of life and death. Follow the haunting journey of a lone tank mechanic struggling to keep the Imperium's war machines alive amidst endless artillery, fire, and chaos. This cinematic Warhammer 40k lore story dives deep into sacrifice, duty, and the fragile pulse of humanity in a universe where machines endure, but men do not. Experience the tragedy, the philosophy, and the raw emotional weight of survival on the front lines. Will he save the engines and himself, or will the war claim him like so many before? Watch, reflect, and step into the crushing reality of war.